NUS. In the summer of 2012, Angelina and the narrator, a married couple, decided to escape the stifling embrace of the metropolis for a couple of weeks. Both barely past their 30th birthdays, they had accumulated fatigue from their workdays. She taught at a school, he worked in sales. Searching for solitude, they found a modest rental cottage online, nestled in the woods near Lake George, New York. Nothing extravagant, a simple wooden structure with a kitchen, living room, bedroom, and a tiny bathroom. The absence of a television and Wi-Fi was compensated by the splendor of the surrounding nature and the peaceful silence. The couple decided it was the perfect place for hiking, fishing, and complete relaxation. Loading the car with groceries, a few books, and hiking gear, they set off at the beginning of July. The cottage was located at the end of a bumpy dirt road, surrounded by a dense wall of tall pines. The place seemed isolated, but there was a special charm to it. Time twos, about 100 yards away beyond thick bushes, another house was visible, looking much older and more dilapidated. Peeling paint, dirty windows, and an overall look of abandonment created the impression that no one had lived there for many years. At first, the couple didn't pay much attention to it, deciding it was probably an old barn or something like that. On the second day, while the narrator was chopping firewood, he found stacked near the shed. He noticed a man coming out of the dilapidated house. He looked to be about 60 years old, with gray hair, a scruffy beard, wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt. He waved. The narrator returned the gesture and went over to say hello. The man introduced himself as Jonathan, speaking the name in a calm, quiet voice. He said that he lived there year-round, working on repairing the house in his spare time. Despite his words, the house didn't look repaired, but the narrator didn't ask any further questions. Time twos. They chatted a little about the weather, how hot the summer had been, and Jonathan mentioned a few good fishing spots on the lake. Soon Angelina joined them, and together they laughed about city dwellers trying to survive in the woods. Jonathan seemed like a perfectly normal person, just a quiet guy who preferred solitude away from civilization. After that, the narrator began to see Jonathan every day around 4 in the afternoon. It became a kind of ritual. The narrator would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, and Jonathan would come over, or if he didn't show up, the narrator would go to his house. They discussed a wide range of topics. One day they talked about the best hiking trails, and Jonathan recommended a scenic loop around the lake that took about 2 hours. Another time, the subject of conversation was cars, and Jonathan talked about his old Ford truck that often broke down. He was interested in the couple's life in the city, and the narrator told him about his job, how Angelina loved teaching children. Jonathan, in turn, shared memories of his childhood in the area, hunting deer in the fall and so on. Nothing deep or strange, just friendly conversations between neighbors. Angelina found Jonathan a little eccentric, living alone in such a dilapidated house, but didn't object to these meetings. She even baked cookies one day and took him a plate in the afternoon. This went on for about 5 days. It seemed the couple had settled into a leisurely vacation rhythm. In the morning they made coffee and scrambled eggs. During the day they read or napped, and in the evening they grilled burgers and watched the sunset. The narrator began to look forward to these 4 o'clock conversations, which added a pleasant variety to their vacation. However, on the 6th day, the narrator decided to go for a hike alone, as Angelina preferred to stay and rest, feeling a little tired from their active walks. Taking a backpack, a bottle of water, and a map of the trail, the narrator left the cottage around noon. The hike was great. He climbed a hill overlooking the lake, walked through a dense forest, saw a deer, and took many pictures on his phone. However, the walk took longer than he had planned, and he didn't return to the cottage until about 3:30. Even from a distance, the narrator sensed something was wrong. The front door was wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. He called out to Angelina, but heard only silence in response. His heart pounded. He thought maybe she had accidentally left the door open, but that wasn't like her. Entering, he saw that the house was a mess. Chairs overturned, drawers pulled out in the kitchen, their belongings scattered on the floor, as if someone had thoroughly searched everything. "Angelina!" he shouted, running through the rooms. The living room was turned upside down, cushions from the sofa thrown on the floor. The bedroom door was closed, but Angelina was nowhere to be seen. Panic began to grip the narrator. He checked the bathroom, but it was empty. Grabbing his phone to call his wife, he found that, as usual, there was no signal. They had to drive about a mile down the road to get reception. He thought that maybe Angelina had gone for help or something. But why was the house such a mess? At that moment, the narrator remembered Jonathan. Maybe he had seen something. Running out of the house, he rushed to his dwelling. The door was closed, the windows dark, as usual. He knocked hard, shouting, "Jonathan, are you there? Something's happened to us." In response, silence. He knocked again, louder, but nothing changed. Then he tried to turn the doorknob, but the door was locked. Peering through the dirty window, he saw only emptiness, shadows, and old furniture. No sign of Jonathan's presence. Disappointed and frightened, the narrator turned back to his cottage. As he entered, he heard a noise from the bedroom, a quiet creak. "Angelina," he called. The door slowly opened, and she appeared on the threshold with a pale face and wide eyes filled with fear. She rushed to him, hugged him tightly, trembling all over. "Oh God, you're back," she whispered. The narrator hugged her back, trying to understand what had happened. She pulled him into the bedroom, closed the door, and in a trembling voice began to tell him what had happened. Her voice seemed to crack under the weight of what she had experienced. She had drifted off to sleep in the afternoon, around 1 o'clock, in the quiet of the cottage, disturbed only by the chirping of birds outside the window. Suddenly, this idyll was shattered by a deafening crash, like thunder out of the blue. The front door, succumbing to brute force, burst open with a crack. Angelina, instantly awakened, felt her heart pounding in her chest. Carefully opening the bedroom door, she peeked out. In the living room, like a ghost, stood Jonathan. In his hand, a large kitchen knife, intended for carving meat, gleamed ominously. He was silent, only scanning the room with an absent gaze. Angelina, momentarily paralyzed by fear, slammed the door shut and locked it. Stepping back, she grabbed a table lamp as a last resort for defense and hid under the bed, trying to breathe as quietly as possible so as not to give away her presence. Jonathan approached the door and first knocked softly. Then his blows became more insistent and louder. "Angelina!" His voice sounded calm and even, as during their usual conversations. "Are you here?" She hid, not answering, praying that he would leave. The knocking stopped, but she heard him wandering around the cottage, opening drawers, turning things over, as if looking for something. Numb with fear, she lay under the bed for another half-hour until she heard my voice. I was stunned and could not find an explanation for what had happened. Why would Jonathan break into the house with a knife in his hand? What was he looking for? Or were his intentions even more sinister? Was he planning to hurt her? The ambiguity of his actions was terrifying. Without wasting a minute, I called 911 and reported the incident. The police assured me that they would send a squad immediately. About an hour later, 2 police officers arrived, a man and a woman, from the local sheriff's department. We told them in detail about our conversations with Jonathan, about his sudden intrusion, and how Angelina had seen him with a knife. They carefully recorded all the details, examined the cottage, and took fingerprints from the broken door. Then they inquired about the neighboring cottage. We pointed it out to them. They went there, but soon returned with the news that it was empty. The door was open, but there was no one inside. Only a thick layer of dust. Old cans of food and a few items of clothing indicated that someone had recently lived there. They contacted the radio to check information about the owner of this property. The situation was taking an increasingly sinister turn. The police contacted the owner of our rented cottage, Mr. Harlan, who lived in the city and managed several properties. He soon arrived, a respectable elderly man in a pickup truck. We asked him about the abandoned cottage next door. Mr. Harlan frowned and replied that no one should be living there. It had been empty for many years. The real owner, a certain Jonathan Ellis, had gone missing 5 years ago, in 2007. He had lived there alone after his wife's death, and then one day simply disappeared, leaving no trace. Due to legal complications related to his disappearance, the house remained abandoned. Mr. Harlan claimed that he often drove past the place and had never seen anyone there. A chill ran down my spine. Jonathan is the name the guy gave us, I said, as if in a daze. The police officers exchanged meaningful glances. They asked us to describe the appearance of the stranger, and the description matched what little they knew about the missing owner from old reports. Gray hair, beard, about the same age. But if it really was him, where had he been all those 5 years? And why had he returned just now, settling in his abandoned house? That same night, the police searched the area with dogs, but found no trace, no clues indicating his whereabouts, no signs of his presence. They suggested that it could have been some vagrant impersonating Jonathan, or perhaps it really was the missing owner, gone wild or lost his mind. It was impossible to say for sure. We weren't going to tempt fate. Packing our things, we left that same night, stopping at a motel along the way. A week later, we received a call from the police informing us that no leads had been found. The case remained open, but without any prospects. They suggested it might have been a failed robbery attempt. But the presence of the knife didn't fit that version. Years later, I still can't forget this story. Was it the real Jonathan, returning from oblivion with some perverse purpose, or someone impersonating him? Like a ghost from the past, he talked to me every day at 4 o'clock, gaining my trust, waiting for his moment. Whatever his intentions, I am haunted by the thought that we never learned the truth. During my first summer away from home after graduating from college, I decided not to return home to work a boring retail job. I wanted adventure. My roommate Chloe and I managed to get summer jobs waitressing in a picturesque resort town a few hours up the coast. It was one of those places you see on postcards, charming little shops, a lively waterfront, and miles of beautiful sandy beaches. We rented a tiny but expensive apartment and felt like we were finally living real adult lives. About a month after we arrived, I met Leo. He worked as a cook at the restaurant next door to ours. He was exactly the kind of guy you'd expect to meet in a beach town, tanned, carefree, with a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He seemed to know everyone and had that confident, laid-back aura of a true local. He started coming over to my work on his breaks, and we'd chat. He was charming, funny, and I confess I developed a bit of a crush. One day, the heroine's heart fluttered with tender feelings. Leo, leaning against the counter, said, "You guys are always at work. You need to see the real side of town, not just the tourist traps." He invited the heroine and Chloe to a local bonfire that he and his friends were planning that night. He described a secluded cove, hidden from the eyes of prying tourists, where the stars shone in all their glory, unmarred by the lights of the waterfront. It sounded like the perfect escape from the crowds they faced every day. The girls gladly accepted the invitation. That evening, after finishing their shifts, they changed clothes and, armed with a pack of non-alcoholic drinks, set off to meet the real, local adventure. Leo's directions led them down a winding dirt road that ended at an inconspicuous trail through the dunes. Dusk was falling, and only the light from their phones illuminated the way. The sound of the surf barely reached them through the tall grass, creating a sense of isolation and foreboding silence. When they finally broke through the last dunes onto the sandy shore, the heroine was overcome with a vague unease. In her imagination, she had pictured a lively group with music and dancing, a classic beach party. But instead, they were faced with only a small bonfire, around which 3 figures were seated. It was Leo and 2 middle-aged men with weathered faces and stern expressions. They didn't say a word as the girls approached, only gave them impassive glances. "Hey, you made it," Leo said, his usual radiant smile seeming out of place in the flickering firelight. "Guys, this is Sarah and Chloe." The men only nodded slightly, their silence drowning out the crackling of the flames. The atmosphere instantly became oppressive. This wasn't a party, but rather an unwelcome intrusion into a private, serious meeting. The girls sat down, trying to strike up a conversation, but their attempts were shattered by a wall of silence. Sarah and Chloe tried to liven up the conversation, but their cheerful chatter sounded ridiculous and loud in the prevailing silence. The older men remained silent, only watching them. Suddenly, Leo pulled out a large clear bottle with no label, filled with a golden liquid. "You have to try this," he offered, holding it out to the girls. "It's a special drink, the best tequila you've ever tasted." "Oh no, thank you," the heroine replied, showing her non-alcoholic drink. "We're fine with this." "Come on, just a shot," Leo insisted, his charming smile taking on an insistent tone. "It's what the locals drink," one of the men grunted in agreement, not taking his eyes off the girls. There was something predatory in his gaze that sent shivers down their spines. The girls politely refused again, and an awkward tension hung in the air. The men continued to drink from their bottle, passing it around, not taking their eyes off the uninvited guests. After 20 agonizing minutes of silence, Chloe suddenly clutched her stomach. "I feel really sick," she said with genuine distress in her voice. "It must be something I ate at work." "Sarah, can we go?" The heroine seized the opportunity. "Yeah, sure, we should probably take you home." Leo's smile vanished instantly. "What? You're leaving already? The party's just getting started." "Sorry," the heroine replied, without a trace of regret. The girls got up and headed back to the trail, their hearts pounding. They didn't say goodbye to the men, didn't even look at them. The trail through the dunes was plunged into complete darkness. The girls walked as fast as they could, trying not to run, the sand treacherously giving way under their feet. About halfway to the car, there was a loud crack of a branch behind them. The girls froze. Then they heard distinct footsteps in the sand. Not just one person. Someone was chasing them. Without another word, they ran, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Bursting out of the dunes, they raced towards the heroine's old car. She frantically tried to open the door, her hands trembling so much that she could barely get the key in the lock. The footsteps were getting closer with each second. Finally, the door opened, and the girls tumbled inside, slamming the doors and pressing the locks, just as the three men emerged from the trail. They didn't shout, didn't bang on the windows, and didn't try to open the doors. They simply stopped and lined up, illuminated by the car's headlights. The two older men stared at the girls with empty, frightening faces, and Leo, the charming local guy, slowly raised his hand and waved slightly, stretching his lips into a smile. It was the same smile he always gave, but without a trace of warmth. Pure ice, a cold and dead grimace. The girls sped off, leaving their pursuers standing in the dirt clearing. It wasn't until a week later, while talking to a police officer about another problem in the area, that the girls learned the truth. Casually mentioning the strange bonfire, they noticed the officer's face darken. He advised them to be careful, telling them that several female tourists their age had gone missing in the town in recent years. They were never found. They were never found. The author of these lines has gone on numerous hiking trips, whether for recreation, work, or training. He is well acquainted with nature and has always treated it with due respect. In most cases, if you exercise caution and use common sense, no problems arise. However, one summer, last year, in the mountains of Northern California, he had an incident that could have had tragic consequences. He was not alone, his young son was with him, which made the situation even more serious. They pitched their small tent in a clearing near the edge of the forest. It was autumn. The nights were getting cool, but the air was fresh, and the sky was clear. The moon shone brightly that night, like a giant lamp hanging above them. Dinner was eaten early in the evening. Nothing special, just packaged food and snacks. The author was careful not to leave food scattered around, knowing how careless tourists attract unwanted attention. About an hour or two after midnight, he woke up. At first, he thought it was just the usual forest noises, but it soon became clear that the sound was louder. It wasn't a squirrel or a raccoon. Something big was moving slowly. He sat up in his sleeping bag and listened intently. The noise repeated. It was the distinct crunch of leaves and branches under a heavy tread. Slowly unzipping the tent flap just enough to peek out, he let his eyes adjust to the moonlight and saw it. About 50-60 feet away, just beyond their campsite, stood a huge bear. A massive, heavy body and head, slowly swaying from side to side as the beast sniffed the ground. The moonlight clearly outlined its silhouette. His heart pounded, but the author forced himself to remain calm. The first thing he did was reach for the gun he always kept close at hand when hiking. He gripped the weapon tightly, not because he wanted to shoot the bear, but because he understood the need to be prepared for any eventuality. He knew that most bears don't attack unless they feel threatened or smell food. There was no food outside, nothing that could attract the beast. But the danger was still real. Ennis, keeping his eyes fixed on the bear, he sensed movement beside him. His son was waking up. The boy rubbed his eyes and whispered, asking what was happening. The author put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence, and slowly pointed towards the tent's exit. The son leaned over, peeked out, and froze upon seeing the bear. Fear was etched on his face, but to the boy's credit, he remained silent and didn't make a sound. His father quietly told him to lie still and not move. The bear sniffed the ground, took another step closer, and stopped. The author didn't want the animal to approach the tent. He needed to do something without making the situation worse. Slowly raising his gun, he aimed at the sky and fired a single warning shot. The sound shattered the silence of the night and echoed through the mountains. The bear flinched, but didn't run. His heart sank with the realization that one shot wasn't enough. Calming his breathing, the author aimed again and fired a second shot into the air. This time, the bear reacted. It turned sharply, shook its head, and bolted back into the woods. The author watched its retreating figure until darkness swallowed it. The sound of heavy footsteps faded, and the forest was silent once more. The sun exhaled the air he had been holding. The father whispered that everything was okay, that the bear was gone, but he knew he wouldn't be able to fall back asleep after this. He coaxed his son to calm down and close his eyes again, but he himself didn't sleep a wink all night, sitting with the gun in his lap and listening to every rustle. The forest can be beautiful, but it can also remind you of how small a person truly is. The author kept replaying possible scenarios in his mind. What would have happened if they hadn't been so careful, if they had left food outside, or if he hadn't had a way to scare the bear away. Many tourists make reckless mistakes, trying to photograph wild animals, shouting to scare them off, or leaving food out without thinking. That's how accidents happen. Most animals won't cause harm if they aren't disturbed, unless there are special circumstances or they feel threatened. That night taught an important lesson. Being prepared isn't a choice when you're in the wilderness, especially with a child who depends on you. Perhaps his son won't remember all the details of what happened, but the author remembers everything: the sound of the bear's footsteps, the weight of the gun in his hand, and the look on his son's face when he saw the animal. When morning finally arrived, the sunlight seemed like the most reliable and safest thing in the world. They packed their things and set off, both with a better understanding of how quickly a peaceful camping trip can turn into a dangerous adventure. Even though nothing terrible happened, the memories of it stayed with the author. It wasn't the scariest story to tell, but for him, it was real, and a reminder of the fine line between safety and danger in the wild.